Hi guys, thanks for joining me on Robin Hood Diaries this evening. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. And I know I threw out some pretty salacious previews today for the show this evening. Um, they're not meant to be clickbait. I mean, everything in there is true. It is maybe enticing to watch the show as a result of what was put in those previews. Nevertheless, they are what they are. It is the subject of cruising, not like the 1980 movie with Al Pacino, although that is a fringe, fracture, fragment, infinitesimal part of cruising. I'm not going to give you a history lesson on cruising. Cruising goes back probably as old as Jesus' sandals. I don't know. I know cruising globally. Let's not go there. The damn wrong guy can cover that. Google it. Um, I know it nationally. Whatever, guys. Cruising is cruising. We're going to talk about cruising in the 1980s for closeted actors. Okay, that's it. Essentially, all roads lead to that, pretty much. My 6 degree chats don't, and some of my shows don't. But there is a running theme into anything I do on this show. Let's cut to the chase. So 1980s cruising was something that was necessary for heavily closeted actors in Los Angeles. There was nowhere for those closeted folks who were so desperately pretending to be straight in order to be hired as such that many of us, forced into situations and scenarios where we may not otherwise have found ourselves had we been, I don't know, a cis actor struggling, whatever. I was a functional bisexual for years, and primarily because of the industry, with the exception of a couple of folks. So that's what it does to you. Now, I'm in one of the previews. I said, blah blah blah, convinced me to get a wife or something of that nature. Well, I'm going to get to that towards the end, how that actually really came to be. So again, history of cruising in LA. Read John Recchi. He's an author. Covered it from years and years and years ago. Pershing Square downtown used to be big for cruising, but cruising is everywhere. But he wrote about it very early on. Oh my God, 75 years ago. Anyway, so here we are. The point of this is not to let you know that a bunch of horny gay guys are driving around looking to have sex, okay? That's not really cruising. Yes, that is actually what cruising is about for a lot of people, and it is the lake that the river runs into. And I can tell you, probably, fortunately or unfortunately, all there is to know about cruising. Science, it's a science. It's methods. It's all kinds of undercurrents that why people do this. I did it for endless years, for perhaps reasons that others did not. Some of that you have to read in my book as to the sort of personality and frame of mind that I was, is, and will be, what have you. But particularly back then, closeted actors in Hollywood were a breed unto themselves, constantly everything, looking over their shoulder, just all that you can imagine that it would be, because this was the 1980s. As I said in one of the previews, the 1980s were not about good music necessarily. They were the Reagan era. They were horror, death, AIDS, an unimaginable tragedy, and all within this structure is a film industry. I have said numerous times on other shows about how and what the dangers were being gay back then. One of the loves of my life was forced, as I mentioned previously, to move out of his home, as ordered by his roommates, within 24 hours of finding out that he was dating me, which meant he was gay, which meant he had AIDS. Everybody in the 80s, every gay male in the 80s had AIDS. That was the running theme. So we were forced into these clandestine situations. There were locations for these situations. There were groups to help people with this conundrum of theirs. Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, a 12-step program that still exists. I suppose tries to grapple with those issues. My experience with SCA was a lot of people cruising other people under the auspices of being in a 12-step program. But anyway, that's just my experience. I have endless experiences with this, guys, in terms of closeted actors, Hollywood, and all the themes in my book, Slaughtered Princes of West Hollywood, do within a matter of days, actually, but I'm not going to jinx it. One in particular, if you saw the face, you would know immediately. He starred in part of a trilogy of a genre, a film I'm not going to mention because I don't even want to go there. I don't know where he is or what's up, but again, one of my tricks, I was one of his tricks. That's what we call each other when we cruise. Usually, you're a trick, I'm a trick. And this poor guy was terrified. He knew I knew who he was. I knew he knew I knew. We cruised each other, and there are thousands of ways to do so in hundreds of locations in Los Angeles, let alone the world. We met under such circumstances. He was living with some producer in West Hollywood in a very nice condominium that was obviously not his. It looked more like I don't know, an expensive law office in Beverly Hills or something, like leather wallpaper and green whatever. Anyway, very unhappy guy, very unhappy in his situation. Yes, we were intimate and so forth. And that's just one of a handful I can name right off the top of my head right now. Way too many. So let me focus on sort of 2 points I want to make. Number one, and then we'll get to the end where, that sort of watershed moment that I mentioned in the preview about tricking with this other actor. Cruising for me was not about sex, believe it or not. It doesn't mean that I didn't follow through. And it doesn't mean that I didn't oblige, but me in particular, because of my framework mentally, which again, you'll have to read the book to delve into that, it was not about sex for me. It was about the hunt. It was ritual. It were these shenanigans that I got into for decades, for years, round the clock sometimes. Just any unaccounted for time that I had where I wasn't due somewhere, expected by someone, was an opportunity to cruise. Now, cruising does not mean, for some of us, particularly for me, driving around horny. I was not driving or walking around fully aroused, waiting for the next encounter. That's not how it worked for me. For me, it was a hunt. I was more akin to a wolf looking for jackrabbits. So the thrill, or the endorphins, or the personality circuitry that goes on, particularly for me, was this hunt sort of scenario. It could be hours long, it could go on for days, hours, however long. And it can be anywhere. I would cruise you could cruise accidentally in Neiman Marcus with somebody that it's just that slaughtered prince kind of look, again, an actor, Neiman Marcus, whatever. Anyway, the examples are endless. But again, for me, it was, you were all jackrabbits, not you. And I was the wolf. And the whole thing was about hunting the jackrabbit. Once I caught the jackrabbit, or the jackrabbit caught me, although I wasn't too fond of being caught. I was much more partial to hunt. So once the jackrabbit's caught, yes, you eat the jackrabbit, you bring the jackrabbit to your den or whatever. Not my den, his den, or somewhere. Point me to the nearest garage. Anyway, so that really was an afterthought. This you know what encounter was sort of, it did always occur 90% of the time, not sometimes. And again, the sex became an afterthought. For me, this was my experience with cruising, but I went through decades of it. I saw it, so many actors struggling, the looks in their eyes, being recognized or potentially recognized, and rushing to your side, begging you not to tell. If it, you just can't imagine. Anyway, so I was tra-la-la cruising through Griffith Park, one of 100 places. You know, there was all different kinds of action, as they called it. Blank action, TR action. I'm not going to give those words, but all kinds of this kind of action, that kind of action. Well, this was Griffith Park. Griffith Park was teeming with cruising at one point in time. I mean, good God in heaven. It was like bed bugs. Anyway, it had been released onto an island with rats. I mean, it was literally everywhere. So I'm in one of these places, actually Griffith Park, believe it or not, and there'd be clusters of people here, there. You had to be, you know, a little careful. And this was a nicer part. This was like a lovely little kind of sort of off the beaten track part of Griffith Park. We do our, you know, connection that is part and parcel with cruising. It's oftentimes an unspoken thing until you are sort of within proximity, and then the conversation goes any which way but loose. You know, it gets so intimate, like you're sharing with this stranger, you know, the intimate details of your life. It's just quite bizarre. I'm sure there are comparable scenarios in you know, the cis world or whatever. I don't know, but this is what I'm talking about for us in the 80s, this milieu of closeted people. So we have our picnic, and we are tidying up our picnic, and we get to talking like, you know, we are wont to do as slaughtered princes of sorts, about very unusually intimate, kind of off-the-wall things. In this case, it was about being closeted. Bingo! And this conversation went like this. He mentioned, we talked about the issue of being closeted, being actors, and he said that he was divorced. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, you know, break yourself of these chains, man, and get married, or get yourself not get yourself a wife, get married. And I said, what? Naive me, not. And he's like, yeah. And, you know, obviously to cover up, to have a beard so people won't ask. And he goes, yeah. He said, you know, in Hollywood, an ex-wife is just as good as a wife. Meaning, to be closeted, either have a wife or have an ex-wife, and then fewer questions will be asked. So, two interesting end notes to this very long show. Number one, I ended up working with this actor not long afterwards in a commercial on the back lot of Universal for, I think it was a beverage or a food. And we were marching down the street with the residents of this area with the product. And he and I were in the front row. He knew who I was. I knew who he was. It was an unspoken discretion, very quiet, very eye-averting kind of vibe. So that's where that ended up. Interesting final note. Days after this encounter with this actor, who shall remain unnamed, of course, who suggested that I get a wife in order to stay in the closet and keep working in the film industry in the 1980s as a gay man, pretending. He said, get a wife, right? So I took my mother out to lunch within the week. I sat her down at a health food restaurant in Fairfax, and I said, I'm getting married. Typically, my mom was neither here nor there. You can't read her to save your life, but that's what I did. I took her to lunch, almost virtually based on this conversation in Griffith Park, and within weeks or so, I was a married man. That's how far some of us had to go, felt compelled to go, and or were forced to go to have a livelihood. That's the show. That's the big salacious cruising show, okay? So I'll see you soon. We have some pretty exciting things lined up, and so looking forward to those. Wednesday, we've got a little bit on reality shows. Thursday, I've got a little bit on my shift in reputation in this town. Friday, I've got a fantastic acting teacher. We're going to have a 6-degree chat. Saturday, some interesting stuff about drag, but not your sort of mainstream run-of-the-mill convo on that one. And on Sunday, I'm thinking of doing a big peek into the life of Lee Rich, who was the movie mogul that began Orion Pictures and then Lorimar. That should be fun, huh? Okay. Thank you for being with me, as always, every day. I look forward to this. And I don't know, don't do anything I wouldn't do. I don't even know what that means anymore with regard to me, but I love you. Take care. Bye.